Fujifilm XF 55 to 200mm f3.5 to 4.8 RLM OIS. It's a very versatile telezoom lens for the Fuji X system. It's priced at around the £700 mark in the UK, although you may find it a little bit cheaper if you shop around. Okay, now the R in the name means aperture ring, so it's one of those Fujifilm X series lenses with an aperture ring. The LM means linear focusing motor, and OIS is of course optical image stabilization. Now, for those of you who think in so-called full frame terms or in 35mm film terms, the equivalent angle of view of this lens is in 35mm terms is 83 to 300mm, so it gives a decent amount of reach. The optical image stabilization is claimed by Fuji to give 4.5 stops of improvement. Okay, I'll put some of the specs up, some of the main specs up on the screen. It's an internally focusing lens, but it zooms externally. So in other words, as you zoom out from 55 towards 200mm, the length of the lens increases. This is common in this price bracket. A lot of pro level f2.8 zooms have a constant length, but not this one. But this is normal for the price range. The optical construction of the lens is 14 elements in 10 groups. 2 of those are extra low dispersion ED glass elements, and it has 1 so-called super ED glass element. It has 8 rounded aperture blades. The aperture ring allows you to stop down all the way to f22 in 1/3 f-stop clicks. In terms of the maximum aperture, it varies from f3.5 at the wider end at 55mm, and that shrinks down to f4.8 at the 200mm end. That's not particularly fast or particularly slow. In fact, it's quite good for the price range, because a lot of lenses in this class are f5.6 at the long end. It's a very nice lens. It's in terms of build and finish. The construction's a mixture of metal and plastic, but the plastics used are look to be very high grade plastics with a very nice finish. It has a nice smooth zoom action. There's a couple of switches on the lens. There's one to switch the OIS on or off, and there's another switch to switch between automatic aperture or manually selected aperture. Then of course you've got the zoom ring, which is rubber covered and quite broad and is quite grippy, good to hold. And then in front of that you've got the manual focusing ring. I'm showing it here mounted on my Fujifilm XE2S, but for the purposes of testing, when I take this camera out later on, I'll be mounting it on my X-T2. It's a reasonably light lens for its size, despite the good quality build. It weighs in at about 580 grams, which for any Americans watching is about 20.5 ounces. Okay. Included when you buy this lens is a plastic hood. Nothing special, fairly cheap looking plastic, not really built to the same standards of the rest of the lens, unfortunately, but that doesn't really bother me. One thing to note about this lens is it's not weather sealed. Before I started exclusively using Fujifilm cameras for my digital photography, I was a Nikon shooter. I still am a Nikon shooter for film, but no longer for digital. At the time I was using my D7200, I had the Nikon AFS 70 to 300mm VR lens. That was the full frame lens. It was a G-type lens, which meant it had no aperture ring. So I just want to make a few comments contrasting and comparing that lens with this one for the Fuji system. Basically, I hated that Nikon lens. I paid about £500 for it, so it's not very pricey lens, but not ultra cheap either. Nikon do cheaper DX only 70 to 300 zooms, but this one, I felt this lens was quite plasticky. The build quality wasn't great. It wasn't nice to use. It had a very sticky, plasticky feeling zoom ring, which I hated. Worse than that, the image quality at the long end, i.e. at 300, because that lens zoomed to 300 rather than just going to 200 as this Fuji lens does. The image quality at 300 was crap. It was a pile of shit, to be honest. So I used to think of it as a 70 to 200 lens. Okay. In any case, the difference in reach between 200mm and 300mm isn't that great anyway. That Nikon lens, was capable of very decent image quality up to about 200mm. So providing you used it like that, it was okay, but not a lens I particularly liked. Before I had that Nikon lens, I had the older AFD 70 to 210mm f4 to f5.6. Now that was a beautifully made lens. That had a very nice feel about it. It was made of metal. It had a lovely zoom action. It was the type of zoom where instead of turning a zoom ring, you slid it forward or back to zoom. That sort of system seems to be less popular these days, but on that particular lens, it was very nice. It had a lovely smooth feel to it. I was initially very happy with the image quality of that lens. Until one day I was shooting some images of a swan in flight, a white swan against the blue sky. And when I viewed the images and to start editing it on my computer, I noticed very serious purple fringing along the edge of the swan's wing. And it was that bad, it was really hard to correct it in Photoshop. So that made me think that lens had to go. And that's when I got the 70 to 300 that I've just been talking about. Anyway, things have moved on. Obviously, I since decided to go Fujifilm. So this was one of the first Fuji lenses I bought. It was actually the second one after the 18 to 55mm f2.8 to f4. In terms of looking for alternatives for the Fuji system, Fuji do a cheaper telezoom. There is the XC 50 to 230mm f4.5 to f6.7. That's also an OIS lens. It has a useful zoom range, but it's part of Fuji's budget XC system. It's much more plasticky, it's not as well built. I've not used that lens, but I would imagine the image quality is not quite as good, although I would expect it to be reasonable. The main problem with that lens for me, however, is it's too slow at the long end. f6.7 at 230mm or 200mm is too slow for me. So that's why I didn't really consider that lens. It might be worth considering for you if money's very tight, but even then I would say in preference look for used versions of this lens, the XF 55 to 200, because it's probably a much better lens. At the other end of the price scale, Fuji do a very pro-orientated XF 50 to 140mm lens, which is a constant f2.8 aperture. That also has optical image stabilization, and basically that's the Fuji equivalent of the Nikon and Canon 70 to 200 f2.8 Pro zooms. So this is basically Fuji's take on that. Unlike this lens, that one is weather sealed. So that's a serious advantage for those of you who may find yourself in inclement weather. It's also obviously a lot faster, constant aperture f2.8. I've not used that lens, but I hope to test one out at some point in the future. I wouldn't expect the image quality to be drastically better, if at all, than this lens. What you're really paying for with that more expensive lens, which incidentally retails for about £1,300, I believe, where the money is really going on that is the f2.8 aperture. To get a constant f2.8 aperture on a zoom lens of this type, it requires some expensive engineering. Anyway, without further ado, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head off outside into the city of Newcastle. I'm going to do some shooting with this XF 55-200. Also, for the sake of comparison, I'll be comparing it at the shorter end of the 55mm end with my trusty 18-55mm lens, so you can see how the image quality compares. So I thought it might also be interesting to also do a comparison with one of my old Nikon mount lenses. Now this is the superb, actually this is probably my favourite lens of all time that I've used. This is the Tokina ATX Pro 100mm f2.8 macro lens. This is a wonderful lens. It's so sharp, the images really pop. It's a superb lens. It's not just for macro either, I use this for all sorts of things. Now I'll be using it on my XT2 with an adapter, but unfortunately on the Fuji system it'll be manual focus only. But that's not a problem for the sake of this review. Here I am on Gateshead Quayside, looking across the river towards Newcastle. This video footage was shot handheld, as you can see. It's not terribly steady. I do have the optical image stabilization on. This is showing the zoom range here. Okay, this still image was taken at 55mm wide open f3.5 and then at 5.6. You can see a bit more contrast on this one, and then at f8, quite similar to the f5.6. This was shot on my 18-55 at f5.6, just for the sake of comparison, and this on my 50mm prime. And now we're showing our 100% crop. And now on the 18-55mm. This is 100% crop on the 50mm. This is shot at 100mm on the zoom at f4 and at f5.6. And this is at f11. This is on my Tokina Prime 100mm at 5.6. And this is 100% crop from the zoom at f4 and at f5.6, and 100% from the Tokina. Right, this is at 200mm wide open on the zoom and at 5.6 and at f8 and at f11. This is 100% crop at 200mm wide open at f4.8 and at f5.6. See, it's a bit better at 5.6, and at f8 it looks a lot better than it does when it's wide open, and this is at f11. Quite decent considering that's 100%. Right, I'm now going to wander around taking shots just with the zoom. This is at 55mm f5.6 and this one at 100mm. And fully zoomed out at 200mm f5.6, looks pretty sharp to me. This is the Gateshead Millennium Bridge at 77.9mm at f7.1. And this one is at f8, sorry. This was shot at 200 f8, and as was this one. Right, this is shot wide open at 55mm, and then I stepped back, did the same shot at 200mm wide open at f4.8. Wide open again at f3.5 at 55mm and at f5.6 at 55mm. And then stepping back at 200mm wide open at f4.8 and at 5.6. So you can see a slight image quality improvement at f5.6. This is fully extended at 200mm at f6.4, as is this one. This is mid-range 128mm at f8, and that's at 55mm f11. Quite decent image quality. Here we have some kittiwakes on the Tyne Bridge, 200mm wide open, and another one, and another one, this time on a nest. This is wide open. This one isn't. This is at f7.1. This is at 156mm at f9. Nice image quality, I think you'll agree. 55mm again at f10. This is at f4.5 at 148mm. This one's at f11 at 55mm. I think you'll agree the image quality is quite pleasing. It looks a very decent lens to me. I'm quite happy with the image quality from this. This is in Grey Street, as you might guess, in Newcastle. Right, the next couple of images, unlike the previous ones, these are all processed from RAW. I used Capture One to do the RAW conversion on these two images. Well, I hope you found the comparisons I've done between this lens and a few others useful. As you will have seen in the images I've just shown, this is a really good lens. Not only is it sharp at all settings, but it has good saturation. It's a nice lens to use. It's very fast focusing. It's lightweight for the class of lens. I think it's very reasonably priced. You may find them brand new as cheap as or as low as 630 if you shop around. The used price will be at least £200 less than that, so it's quite a good used buy. Yeah, superb lens. I would highly recommend it. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you for watching. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting, entertaining, or informative, or all three. If so, please like and subscribe. And you know, it would really help me if you would subscribe to my channel. This is still quite a young channel. I'm still sort of perfecting my videos at the moment. Hopefully I'm getting a little bit better with each new one that comes along. So it would really help me out if you subscribed. Also, I'll be putting a few affiliate links under the video for this lens and some other items of Fujifilm gear. So if you are thinking of or intending to buy one of these items, if you did buy through my affiliate links, then that would help me out also and help me continue to make these videos. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.